An armored money transport truck is designed to look normal from the outside so it doesn't attract attention, but in reality it's armored against bullets and against almost any possible break-in attempt. Literally, you would need an explosive to get through it. The truck was parked in a mall parking lot. The driver was sitting inside the vehicle while his partner got out and went into the mall to finish his work. A few minutes later, when the partner came back, he was shocked. The van was gone, along with the driver and along with the $1 million that had been inside it. When investigators arrived, they were stunned because none of the people who were around the area saw or heard anything. If thieves were the ones who stole it, they would have needed an explosion or massive force to break into it, and for sure someone would have noticed something. So how did the truck disappear? Did the driver have something to do with it? Or did the thieves invent a genius way to take it in complete silence? But how? Most of you have probably heard of armored money transport trucks. Usually these trucks are heavily armored, and the drivers and guards inside are armed. One of the biggest money transport companies in America is Wells Fargo. This company operates a large fleet of armored money trucks in different shapes and sizes. Our story begins on November 28, 1994, specifically in front of a mall located in the U.S. state of Arizona. Around midday, a small van arrived at the mall parking lot. From the outside, it looked completely normal, just like any regular work van. But in reality, it was one of Wells Fargo's armored money transport vehicles. Despite its normal appearance, the van was extremely fortified. Under that plain exterior were bullet-resistant steel plates. Everything in the van, from the outer body to the glass windows, was bulletproof and nearly impossible to penetrate. You would need explosives or massive force to break through that armor. The doors were the same way. It was impossible to open them from the outside. The van looked ordinary on purpose so it wouldn't attract attention. Inside the van were two people. The first was the driver, who was armed with a handgun. The second was the money collector, who was also armed. The money collector's job was simple. Every time they stopped at a store or business, he would get out of the van, go inside, collect the cash, then return to the van. The van would then transport the money to the bank. After the money collector got out of the van, the driver stayed inside, waiting as usual. The money collector went into the mall and headed toward the financial office. This office collects all the cash from the mall's stores. After receiving the cash, the collector headed back toward the van. That's when the surprise happened. When he reached the parking lot, there was no van. He started looking left and right, confused, but the armored van was completely gone. Immediately, the money collector contacted the police and reported what happened. Police responded right away. At the same time, the FBI was notified because any case involving armored money transport vehicles is considered a federal case. Police officers and FBI investigators arrived at the mall parking lot to investigate the incident. Naturally, the first person they spoke to was the money collector. He told them that from the moment he left the van until the moment he returned, no more than 5 minutes had passed. And when he came back, the van and the driver were gone. He also told them that the total amount of money inside the van exceeded $1 million. And keep this in mind, we're talking about 1994. If we calculate that amount using today's value after inflation, the money would be almost double, around $2 million. Investigators then conducted interviews with people who were inside the mall, in the parking lot, and around the area during that time, but every single person said the same thing. They didn't notice anything. They didn't hear anything. Investigators couldn't find a single witness who could help describe what happened. Everyone who was in the mall parking lot or nearby said everything was calm and nothing unusual stood out. This made investigators even more confused. This was an armored truck. It was impossible to break into it without explosives or massive force, and if explosives were used, there would have been noise. Someone would have noticed. And the van's doors were impossible to open from the outside. Even if someone somehow forced them open, a very loud alarm would have gone off, an alarm that everyone nearby would have heard. So if no explosives were used and no massive force was used, how did the van disappear? The only logical conclusion investigators could reach was that the driver had some involvement. Either he stole the van himself, or he cooperated with others, or he was threatened and forced to open the van. This was the only explanation that made sense. In many armored truck robberies, the driver is often involved in the operation, so investigators turned their focus to the driver. The driver's name was John Magok, and he was 38 years old. The FBI immediately began a large-scale search for the van. Police patrols spread across the area. Helicopters were used for aerial searches. The search area was centered around the mall and expanded outward for tens of kilometers. The focus was mainly on neighborhoods close to the mall. Investigators believed that whoever stole the van would abandon it as quickly as possible in the nearest location. They would transfer the money to another vehicle and then disappear. So logically, the van should have been close. While the search continued, investigators began looking into the driver's background, John Magok. The first thing they discovered was that he had no criminal record at all. The FBI obtained a warrant allowing them to search his apartment. When they arrived, they had the landlord open the door for them. Investigators entered the apartment and searched for anything that could indicate John's involvement in the robbery. They found nothing. On the contrary, the apartment was clean, organized, and completely normal. There were no packed bags, no missing belongings, no signs of preparation to flee. If John had planned something like this, he would have at least packed important items. There would have been chaos or missing things, but the apartment looked completely normal. Investigators then spoke to his relatives, friends, and acquaintances. Every single one of them described him as honest, trustworthy, and very serious about his job. All of these testimonies, combined with the fact that he had no criminal history, led investigators to temporarily rule him out as a suspect. But the same disturbing question returned again. If a gang stole the van, how did they get inside it and bypass all the security systems without anyone noticing or hearing anything? With no other options left, investigators had no choice but to turn to the media and ask the public for help. The FBI and local police held a press conference where they explained the details of the case and asked anyone who might have seen or heard something suspicious to contact them. They also released photos and details of the missing armored van and the missing driver, John McGough, and they announced a reward of $60,000 for any information that could lead to solving the case. Only a few hours later, police received a call from a man who said he had seen a van parked in a church parking lot. He said the van matched the same description and license plate number that police had released. When police arrived at the church parking lot, they found it. The missing armored van was parked there. FBI investigators rushed to the scene. The shock came when they looked inside the van and saw a body lying on the floor. At first, they couldn't identify who the body was. The van's engine was still running, and the doors were locked from the inside. Even investigators couldn't open the doors. They had to contact the armored transport company so their employees could come and unlock the van. That's how secure the vehicle was. Even the FBI couldn't open it. Once the van was opened, investigators were able to confirm the identity of the body. As expected, it was the driver, John McGough. After that, investigators closely examined the van from the inside and the outside. They found no signs of forced entry. There were no visible signs of violent intrusion. It was clear that whoever carried out the operation was experienced and that the crime was planned and executed with a high level of professionalism. Forensic experts examined the van inside and out, looking for any trace the criminals might have left behind. But once again, nothing. The van was completely clean. No hair, no DNA, no fingerprints belonging to anyone other than Wells Fargo employees. The only thing investigators found inside the van were small remnants of money that the thieves had left behind. These were mostly coins. Most likely the thieves left them because coins are heavy and low in value. All the paper cash was gone. At this point, investigators had no clear leads pointing to the criminals, so they began analyzing everything step by step. The first conclusion was that the people who carried out the robbery were most likely more than one person, at least two or more. It would be extremely difficult for one person to pull off an operation like this alone. The second conclusion was that these people had experience dealing with law enforcement and understood police procedures. Another important detail was where the van was abandoned. It was left outside the city limits. This was not random. Leaving it there meant the case would fall under the jurisdiction of a different police department. That always complicates investigations because different departments have to coordinate, which slows everything down. During the autopsy, the medical examiner found fragments of the bullet that struck the driver, but the fragments were very small, too small to identify the exact type of bullet. The bullet was designed to shatter into small pieces upon impact. Criminals usually use this type of ammunition to prevent police from tracing the bullet back to a specific weapon. The medical examiner also determined that the shot was fired from a relatively long distance. It was fired from more than 10 meters away. This meant the driver was not shot at close range. If the shot had been fired from close range, there would have been gunpowder residue on the bullet fragments, but there was none. So investigators concluded that the shot was fired from a distance of more than 10 meters. Days later, investigators finally got a new lead. The FBI found a witness who said he had seen the van after it left the mall parking lot. The witness said that at the time of the robbery, he was standing at an intersection near the mall. While standing there, he saw a white van coming from the direction of the mall at a very high speed. The van passed right in front of him without slowing down. He also said that a red pickup truck was following the van closely at the same speed. However, he wasn't sure if the two vehicles were connected. The witness, whose name was Morgan, couldn't remember many other details. He couldn't remember how many people were inside the vehicles. He also couldn't remember the license plate number of the red pickup truck. Investigators then made an unusual request. They asked Morgan to come with them to FBI headquarters so they could introduce him to a forensic hypnosis expert. Morgan agreed and went with them. The hypnosis expert's job was to guide Morgan back to that moment so he could relive it as if it were happening again. And it worked. Under hypnosis, Morgan was able to remember more details. He remembered that there were 2 people inside the van, and there was 1 person inside the red pickup truck. This meant investigators now believed the gang consisted of 3 people or more. Morgan was also able to partially remember the pickup truck's license plate. He remembered that the plate included the numbers 2, 3, and 7, but he couldn't remember the exact order. He also couldn't remember the letters or symbols. Even so, this partial information was considered a big breakthrough. Investigators began searching for red pickup trucks whose license plates included those numbers, but this search returned hundreds of results. At that time, Arizona vehicle registration records did not include vehicle color. That made the search much harder. Despite this obstacle, investigators continued interviewing owners of pickup trucks whose plates matched those numbers. After dozens of interviews and follow-ups, they still couldn't identify the correct vehicle. Unfortunately, that lead turned into a dead end, but the case didn't stop there. After the hypnosis session, Morgan was also able to remember the appearance of one of the men who was inside the van. Investigators brought in a forensic sketch artist. Based on Morgan's description, the artist created a sketch of the man. The sketch showed a man with long hair and a distinctive thick beard. This sketch was released to the media. A few days later, police received a phone call from a woman. The woman said she believed she recognized the man in the sketch, but she said she couldn't speak directly to investigators because she was afraid the people around her might be involved in the crime. She feared that if they suspected her, something could happen to her. After investigating her background, police found that her driver's license had expired, so they used that as a pretext. Local uniformed police, not FBI agents, went to her home and brought her in under the excuse of license-related issues. This was done to avoid raising suspicion. Once she was safely at the station, FBI investigators interviewed her in private. The woman told them that she had a friend named Judy Espinoza. She said that when Judy saw the sketch on TV, she immediately called her and said that the man in the sketch looked exactly like her boyfriend. The woman encouraged Judy to contact the police, but Judy didn't, so the woman decided to contact them herself. Investigators thanked her for her cooperation and allowed her to return home. Now they needed to speak to Judy. Investigators went to Judy's workplace. They identified themselves and explained they were investigating the armored van robbery. They warned her that lying in a federal investigation is a crime. Judy agreed to answer their questions. She told them that her boyfriend's name was James Greenham. She admitted that he did in fact resemble the man in the sketch. She said that after seeing the sketch, she confronted James and asked him about it. He didn't give her a clear answer. Instead, he asked her a strange question. He asked her what she would do if he suddenly had a lot of money. That response made her uneasy. Judy also told investigators that James had a close friend named Timothy Ring. She said the 2 of them were always together and would sometimes visit Timothy's place. She also said that both James and Timothy were completely broke. They had no money. But suddenly, over the past month, they started buying expensive things, jet skis, watches, and other items far beyond what they could afford. This new information was extremely valuable. Investigators were now almost certain they had found the people responsible. But Judy's statements alone were not enough. They still needed solid evidence. They also still needed to answer the biggest question of all. How did they get inside the armored van? Did they know the driver? Did they convince him to open the door? Did they threaten him? What exactly happened? Investigators began digging deeper into the backgrounds of James and Timothy. The first major discovery was that Timothy Ring owned a red pickup truck that matched the description given by the witness Morgan. However, the license plate numbers did not match exactly. Still, this was a strong lead. Investigators also discovered that Timothy had previously worked as an FBI informant. Also learned that both James and Timothy had previously worked as prison guards. They had received professional firearms training. This confirmed what investigators suspected from the beginning. The people who carried out this crime were professionals. They understood weapons. They understood law enforcement. They understood how to stay calm. This made the investigation even more difficult, because now investigators had to monitor suspects who were trained and highly alert. The FBI assigned ground surveillance teams, and even aerial surveillance, to follow them 24 hours a day. During surveillance, agents noticed that James and Timothy were spending large amounts of money, but neither of them had a legitimate source of income. Agents documented every person they met and every place they went. Investigators also believed that there was at least one more person involved in the crime. After weeks of surveillance, the FBI finally identified the third accomplice, a man with a beard named William Ferguson. When investigators looked into his background, they discovered he was a former police officer. He had been forced into early retirement due to misconduct. His profile fit perfectly: experienced with weapons, experienced with police procedures, and with a troubled past. The FBI began monitoring all three men: James Greenham, Timothy Ring, William Ferguson. Sometime later, investigators received new information that confirmed they were on the right path. A man came forward to the FBI and gave them a statement. His name was Michael Sanders. Michael told investigators that during the month of November, the same month the robbery happened, he had been spending time with Timothy Ring and James Greenham. He said that the three of them had been watching and scouting armored money trucks together. They were studying their routes, their stops, and their schedules. Michael also told them that there was a former police officer helping them. He said the officer's nickname was Virgie. Michael said he never actually met this officer face-to-face, but he knew he existed and was helping them. At this point, investigators strongly believed that Virgie was William Ferguson. Michael Sanders appeared to have been intended as a fourth member of the crew, but at some point they cut him out of the plan and moved forward without him. And now, out of anger and frustration, Michael decided to report them. This new statement further confirmed that investigators were heading in the right direction. But once again, Michael's words alone were not enough. They still needed solid proof. So surveillance continued. One of the tactics investigators used was searching through trash. Whenever one of the suspects threw away garbage, surveillance agents would retrieve the trash bags and search them for evidence. In one of the bags, investigators found papers with handwritten notes and diagrams. The papers showed routes and movement patterns of armored money trucks. This wasn't definitive proof, but it was valuable supporting evidence. Despite weeks of surveillance, investigators still couldn't gather the final piece they needed. So after discussing their options, they made a decision. They would create the evidence themselves. But how? They decided to try and record the suspects admitting to the crime. To do that, they needed a perfect setup. Through surveillance, investigators noticed that the three suspects frequently met at James Greenham's apartment. That made sense. James lived alone, while the others had families. So James's apartment was the safest place for them to meet without suspicion. The FBI decided to install listening devices inside the apartment. One night, after confirming that James was not home, FBI agents quietly entered the apartment. They made sure there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no damaged doors. Everything had to look untouched. Inside, they carefully installed hidden listening devices in strategic locations. Once they finished, they left the apartment exactly the way they found it. Now the FBI could listen to every conversation that happened inside. At the same time, they were also monitoring phone calls. But investigators knew something important. The suspects weren't stupid. They weren't going to casually talk about the robbery out of nowhere. So the FBI needed to push them. They needed to provoke them into talking. To do that, investigators released false information to the media. They held another press briefing and intentionally gave incorrect details about the suspects. They described people who looked nothing like the real suspects. They said one was bald, one had dark skin. They invented descriptions that were completely off. After releasing this misleading information, investigators waited. They knew the three suspects would eventually meet and talk about it, and they were right. The three men met at James's apartment as usual. And just as expected, they started talking about the investigation. They laughed about how wrong the police descriptions were. They joked about how the investigation was completely off track. They felt safe. They felt confident. But despite all the conversations, they never directly said, "We did it." That was the missing piece. The evidence was strong, but the FBI wanted something airtight. So surveillance continued. Over time, agents captured more conversations. In one phone call, they overheard Timothy Ring talking about buying expensive cars. He was worried that buying them might attract attention.
Yeah, the only problem with BMWs is they draw a lot of attention. See, nobody thinks about anything if you buy a Pontiac.
Oh, I was thinking about that too.
You know, all of a sudden a BMW's parked in your driveway, I guarantee you're going to be in trouble.
I'm tempted to go get myself a Z anyways. I really am. I'm very, very, very tempted.
Well, I think you should wait.
Oh, no Fergie.
Well, I'm just checking.
Jesus Christ.
Later in the same call, Timothy complained about James. He said James was becoming weak and nervous. He said James was cracking under pressure and might make a mistake.
Yeah, he was doing so good too, but not anymore. I'm cutting him off.
Well, that'll fuck up one of our plans.
What's that?
What was they going to fuck up north?
I don't mean getting rid of him.
Oh.
Just cutting him off as far as supplying him with what he needs to be that way. So you don't understand, I hold both of his and mine. I have it. He doesn't.
From these conversations, investigators understood something important. Timothy was holding James's share of the money. He wasn't giving him all of it at once. Instead, he was giving him small amounts over time. This was a way to control him, to keep James dependent, to keep him quiet. Investigators also realized that Timothy was clearly the leader. James was not an equal partner. He was being treated like a subordinate, and William Ferguson appeared to be closer to Timothy, treated more like a trusted partner. Timothy's personality also became clear through the recordings. He was aggressive, harsh, controlling, and that pressure was being placed mostly on James. James was the weakest link, so they decided to focus on him. They needed to increase his stress. One of the things they did was place printed sketches of the suspect's face near the door of James's apartment. When James saw the sketch, he was confused and scared, but at first he didn't immediately assume it was the police. He thought maybe a neighbor was messing with him. A few days later, investigators took it a step further. An FBI agent left a business card at James's apartment door. The card had the agent's name and phone number. Under the name, it said investigator. On the back of the card, written in pen, was evidence number 173. Investigators watched James's reaction closely. When James saw the card and read the word investigator, fear immediately hit him. When he turned the card over and saw evidence number 173, he knew something was very wrong. He immediately believed the police were onto him. James panicked. He left his apartment, got into his car, and drove away. The FBI followed him, but this time from the air using a helicopter so he wouldn't notice. James kept driving farther and farther away until he reached an isolated area in the desert. He got out of the car and called Timothy Ring. James was extremely nervous during the call. He told Timothy about the investigator's card. He told him about the evidence number. He said he believed the police were watching him. Let's listen to the recording.
There's been a detective at my house. Over what? I don't know. Is that right? He left his business card. Tom Clayton, senior investigator. I don't know what that would be, but there's nothing to sweat.
In the call, Timothy tried to calm him down. He told him not to worry. He told him to go back home and act normal. He said everything would be fine. He also said he would come see him the next day to talk in person. James went back to his apartment and stayed there that night. The next morning, Timothy went to James's apartment. Remember, this apartment was bugged. Investigators listened to the entire conversation. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. Timothy spent most of the time calming James down. James was clearly shaken and paranoid. Toward the end of the conversation, Timothy said something important. He told James that if the police really had evidence, they would have already raided the apartment and arrested him.
They were uncomfortable with something that big. If they thought you were involved, they'd crash your door. If they thought that you knew something, they would not need to talk. They would come back and tell it that way.
When investigators heard this conversation, they knew they had enough. Even though no one directly confessed, the context was overwhelming. The fear, the control, the reassurance. It was clear what they were hiding. Investigators decided it was time to act. The very next morning, arrest warrants were issued. Police units moved toward the suspects' homes. James Greenham was arrested at his apartment without resistance. As for William Ferguson, the former police officer, he tried to resist arrest, but officers were able to control him and take him into custody. Now there was only one left, Timothy Ring. Because Timothy had previously worked as an FBI informant, the FBI didn't want to arrest him the usual way. Investigators believed Timothy was the most dangerous of the three. They feared that if officers tried to arrest him in the field, he might be armed and could open fire, which could get someone killed. So they came up with a different plan. The FBI contacted Timothy and told him they needed to speak with him regarding a previous case he had helped them with as an informant. Timothy agreed and said he would come in. What he didn't know was that this was a trap. When Timothy arrived at the FBI office, undercover agents were already waiting for him in the lobby. This is real footage. You can see Timothy walking into the FBI building, completely unaware of what's about to happen. The undercover agents quickly moved in, grabbed him, and arrested him before he could react. That's why they arrested him this way. If he had known he was being arrested, he might have come armed. But inside the FBI building, he wouldn't bring a weapon. With that, all three suspects were now in FBI custody. The next step was searching their homes and properties for evidence. In Timothy Ring's house, investigators found a piece of paper. On it was a breakdown showing how the stolen money was divided between the three men. They had written the first letters of their names and listed how much each person received. This paper was added to the evidence list. In Timothy's garage, investigators also found the red pickup truck. As mentioned earlier, its license plate didn't match exactly what the witness remembered, but investigators believed the witness may not have recalled it perfectly. Investigators also found a bag inside Timothy's home containing a large amount of cash. When they searched the homes of the other suspects, they recovered almost all of the stolen money. Nearly the entire $1 million was found. Only about $100,000 was missing. Investigators believed that money had been spent over the previous 3 months. At this point, the case was solid. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The FBI knew they were going to win this case. Investigators began interrogating the 3 suspects. Timothy Ring and William Ferguson refused to speak or cooperate in any way. Despite all the evidence against them, they stayed silent. James Greenham, however, was different. He showed signs of regret. Investigators had always believed James was the weakest link. If anyone was going to talk, it would be him. At first, even James refused to speak. Investigators spent over an hour questioning him. The entire time, he muttered unclear words and avoided answering directly. But after intense pressure and repeated questioning, James finally broke.
Tim is using you. You're Tim's little patsy. Tim is going to sell you down the river. Tim laid it out, didn't he? Did Tim lay out the plan? Are you willing to sit here and let someone point the finger at you for pulling the trigger? Tim pulled the trigger. Huh? Tim pulled the trigger. Tim pulled the trigger?
He told them the truth. James said that Timothy Ring was the one who fired the shot. That was the moment everything changed. After that admission, James agreed to fully cooperate with investigators. He explained the entire operation. He explained how the crime was planned, and he explained the role each person played. According to James, planning for the robbery began 6 months before it was carried out. The idea came from Timothy Ring. Timothy was the mastermind. He was the one who encouraged the others to join him. They began tracking multiple armored money trucks. They followed them. They mapped out their routes. They wrote down their stops and schedules. After months of surveillance, they found the perfect target, the armored van driven by John Magog. They focused exclusively on that van. They studied its route from start to finish. One of the main reasons they chose this van was its stop at the mall around midday. They knew the mall would be relatively quiet at that time. They also noticed that John always parked in the same exact spot. Another important detail was that the mall stop was near the end of the route. That meant the van had already collected a large amount of cash from other businesses earlier in the day, so this was the point when the van would be carrying the most money. But the most important reason they chose this van was a habit. They noticed that every time John stopped at the mall, he would open the van door and smoke a cigarette. This was the opening they needed. Company rules strictly forbid drivers from opening the door while stopped, but John ignored that rule. His addiction to smoking was stronger than protocol. Even the choice of date was carefully planned. They chose November 28th because it was Thanksgiving season. Businesses were busy. Cash amounts were higher than usual. Nothing about this plan was random. On the day of the robbery, James Greenham and William Ferguson waited nearby. They waited until the money collector exited the van and walked into the mall. Then, just like always, they saw John pull out a cigarette. He cracked the door open slightly to smoke. Some of you might wonder, why didn't he just open the window? The answer is simple. The window doesn't open. That's a security feature. So he had to open the door. He opened it only a small amount, about 20 centimeters. But that small opening was more than enough. Timothy was waiting in the red pickup truck at a distance, not very far. When he saw the door crack open, he raised his rifle. Through that small opening in the door, Timothy fired. The bullet struck John in the side of the head. After John collapsed, James and William immediately jumped into the van and drove it out of the mall parking lot. Timothy followed behind them in the red pickup truck. All of this happened without anyone nearby noticing. No one heard anything. The operation was completely silent. They drove until they reached the church parking lot. As mentioned earlier, this church was outside city limits. That was intentional. Once they arrived, they immediately transferred the money from the van to the pickup truck. They left behind only the coins. Then they abandoned the van and drove away in the pickup truck. They headed deep into the desert. There they burned all their clothes and any evidence that could link them to the crime. James also told investigators that the pickup truck's license plate was fake. They buried the fake plate in the desert where they burned the evidence. Investigators asked James to take them to that location. James agreed. At the site, investigators found a pile of burned clothing and items. They also recovered the buried fake license plate. And this was the shocking part. The fake license plate contained the same numbers the witness Morgan had recalled under hypnosis, which meant the hypnosis had actually worked. After all of this, the 3 men were put on trial. James Greenham and William Ferguson were both convicted as accomplices. Each of them received prison sentences of around 30 years. As for Timothy Ring, he faced the most severe punishment. He was the mastermind behind the operation, and he was the one who fired the shot that killed John Magog. Timothy pleaded not guilty. He denied being the shooter. His case dragged on in court for several years. Every time Timothy appeared in the media, he insisted that he was innocent. He claimed the FBI had framed him. In the end, the jury found Timothy Ring guilty. In 1997, the judge sentenced him to death. However, the death sentence was never carried out. Later, the case went to the Supreme Court. The death sentence was overturned due to legal technicalities in Arizona law. Specifically, the judge had issued the death sentence without a jury determining the aggravating factors. Because of that, the sentence was invalidated. Today, Timothy Ring is serving a life sentence in prison. So in the end, the armored van wasn't defeated by explosives. It wasn't defeated by force. It wasn't defeated by chaos. It was defeated by a habit, a door opening just a few inches, a cigarette, and one perfectly timed shot.